This episode is from JALTCALL Conference 2026, featuring keynote speaker Mehrasa Alizadeh. This episode is brought to you by Ego AI, Lingo Lesson, English Central, X Reading, Alma Publishing, and RDR Services. Enjoy the show.
We have a wonderful guest with us. She's a local. So this is Mehrasa Alizadeh. She's an associate professor at Otemon Gakuen University. Her academic journey began in English language and literature and TEFL, and she later completed her PhD in Japan, which is pretty rare, and as a mixed scholar, which is amazing, at Osaka University, right? And her current research, her research includes, of course, computer-assisted language learning, like all of us. Specifically, she's been doing virtual reality, which is how I met her, and other immersive technologies, AI-enhanced communication, online and flipped learning design, and learner engagement and self-efficacy. So today, she's going to talk about her immersive technologies in language education today. So let's welcome her. Thank you very much.
Hello everyone. Thanks for being here. Welcome to this presentation. My name is Mehrasa Alizadeh, and as Jeanette kindly introduced me, I belong to Otemon Gakuen University. Today I'd like to tell a story of my academic and professional life and what has failed and prevailed in my journey all along. Also, we know that the Cube is a great venue most of the time for Pechakucha Nishinomiya, and therefore, in keeping with that importance and significance of this venue, I've tried to follow the Pechakucha principles in forming my presentation. It doesn't mean I'll do 20 seconds per slide, don't expect that. But I definitely made my slides with the principles of Pechakucha in mind, just like Brent's yesterday. Mine's also full of images, and I'll follow a storytelling theme throughout my presentation. Thank you very much to all the JALTCALL organizers also for having me here, and for you to be here on a Sunday morning so early. Thanks, really appreciate it. So some of you may know me, but if you don't, I come from Iran. That's the part of the country where I come from. And as Jeanette said, I moved to Japan in 2014 to pursue a graduate degree. I've done my master's back in Iran, and I came on the mixed scholarship to Japan to complete my PhD. Now, before I tell you about my engagement with immersive technologies and reflect on all that, what has failed and prevailed, I do want to take you back to my years in Iran and tell you a little bit about that context. So here comes the flashback. As you can see, for most of my years in Iran, having been born and raised in a very low resource context, most of my primary, secondary, and for the most part tertiary education went on without any access to technology or the internet. In fact, in my early years of English language learning, cassette tapes were as high-tech as it could get. I'm only 38, by the way. In case you were wondering, that's not a long time ago. And later on, I also taught English while I was a student, part-time, to various age groups. I taught adolescents, I worked with high school students, and I also was teaching a few courses to undergraduate students in my later years. And usually, we had chalkboards and textbooks, and if you got lucky, your classroom would have whiteboards and CDs. Now, in my last years in Iran, I kind of had settled on the thought of moving to Japan. I had traveled to Japan twice before coming here as a student, and so I'd chosen to come to Japan, but I wasn't quite sure that the plan to move to Japan would work out. So while I was waiting to see what happens with my scholarship, my parents and also some of my professors requested that I start a PhD program back in Iran. And that's what I did. So that was my plan B in case the Japan plan would fail. And so I entered a PhD program back in a university in Tehran, and I was hopeful, really excited in the beginning that I could hopefully do research on technology-enhanced language learning. I even remember that I self-taught, with the help of some friends around, of course, how to use Moodle, how to install Moodle on a server, because by the way, the university did not have any LMS. And I was also working with some plugins like Poodle, was excited to see all the possibilities. But, yes, thank you. This is back in 2011, 10, yes. And so yeah, I was excited, but when I talked to the university IT department about all these plans, it was as if I had proposed a security attack on the university IT systems. There was so much paperwork to do and so many hurdles to overcome that it almost felt impossible to, just have access to an LMS, something that we all take for granted these days. And then, so this plan didn't work out, as you can see, and by the time I knew I had the scholarship to come to Japan, I simply, even though I'd done 2 years in that PhD program, I simply left it and I came here and I started from scratch. Now, coming here, you can imagine that there were, before I talk about my story in Japan, I would like to also point out about some of the things that, even though there was a lot of failure in my story, there were some things that prevailed, hopefully, as the theme of the conference asks us to reflect on both. So in my years back in Iran, even though I couldn't do the kind of research that I was hoping to because of all the difficulties and lack of access to resources, I managed to have a good, master's and PhD program coursework, and that's what helped me quite a lot in my later years in Japan. We know that in Japan, and I will point out this in my slide later, that there's not much coursework. You just jump into your research, and if you don't have the theoretical basis, you got to figure it out by yourself. And luckily, I was in a good program for the master's and the PhD back in Iran, and I managed to build that theoretical foundation, which proved very helpful in my later years in Japan. But beyond that, I also learned how to collaborate with others. These two are two of the first collaborative publications that I had back in Iran. I was just in my 20s, so you can imagine that it was a big deal back then for me to publish and to get my name out there in prestigious journals and also in a book chapter, as you can see here. Now, that's all about the Iran part of the story. Now, moving to Japan, I immediately had a big monster to fight. I guess you know that I'm referring to the Japanese language. So you can see that immediately after entering the university program at Osaka University, now called the University of Osaka, I was put into an intensive Japanese language course, which I think in one of the forums that I attended yesterday, Wana was also mentioning that we all get bombarded with so much input in Japanese. I usually refer to it in Krashen's terms as I plus 1,000. I'm not kidding. That was my context. And then, yeah, having been through that, and luckily having learned, English as my second language, and also French as a third language, and also Arabic. At schools in Iran, we learn Arabic, but through pure grammar translation. I was already an experienced language learner, so I knew how to navigate the storms. Going back to Brent's talk yesterday. Luckily, I knew what I wanted to do, so I managed to find ways to practice my language skills outside the classroom and to be able to improve my Japanese, hopefully in a short amount of time. The reason I needed the Japanese was to enter a degree program here. You would need to know some Japanese, depending on your school. Also, to do research, if you were interested in collecting data from Japanese learners, working with them, you would need, many of us are familiar with this situation, that you would need to make your surveys in Japanese to avoid the language barrier. Also, your interviews would have to be in Japanese. So all of these made me actually try to learn the language in a very intensive manner in just a very short time. And also, I wanted to eventually naturalize. That's what I also pointed out and talked about in my interview earlier. That was the plan from day one, by the way. Because as a researcher, I wanted to be free. I wanted to have the ability to travel and to engage with researchers worldwide. So that was my plan from day one. And yeah, so recently in a chapter that I published with colleagues at Otemon University at our institute, I have written about these experiences in Japanese for the first time. This is meant to be a chapter for students to read at our school and also for the general readers. So that's where the vertical writing and all those elements of general readership books in Japan come from. Yeah, I've written about these stories, but if you'd like to read an early draft in English, I'd be very glad to provide you with one. Yeah, so it was my original plan moving to Japan was to enter a graduate school related to language and culture. And I was, as you can imagine, excited about all the possibilities. But coming to Japan, I found out that this plan would actually not work out because the grad school I was thinking of entering had an entrance exam all in Japanese, an essay-type written test that I would straight away fail if I took the test today. So there was no way I could pass that entrance exam, and that meant risking losing my scholarship. Simply, that was a risk I couldn't afford to take. So with the help of the International Center at my university and also my former supervisor, we managed to find a supervisor in a different graduate school, the Graduate School of Information Science and Technology, and I entered the, this is the name of the lab, Integrated Media Environment Lab in 2015. The name itself was a mouthful, as you can imagine, and it was always a bunch of geeky people working on development projects. So all of my lab mates came from a different academic discipline and research paradigm. And entering this lab, to be honest, in the beginning felt like a complete failure. I was like, wow, I thought that I had saved myself the risk of failing the entrance exam and losing my scholarship, but here I was. This is a recent picture, but I used to work in this room as a student, and as you can imagine, it felt quite intimidating in the beginning, like being in an environment where you don't know what the rest of the people are talking about. Maybe you know a little bit because you're interested in technology, but most importantly, they don't know what you're doing here and what you're talking about, which was the scarier part, to be honest. Now, for those of you who are familiar with the context of graduate schools in Japan, I know some of us are doing their PhDs here or have done their PhDs here. You're probably familiar with the laboratory culture in Japan. This is quite different from many countries and very specific to the context of Japan, where all graduate students, are working under a team, and usually your supervisor, who is most of the time a full-time professor, owns a lab which you and the rest of the students belong to, but it's not just the students. There's also other faculty members, usually of different ranks, let's say associate or assistant professors and so on, who work together as one team. And so you belong to that team, even though you're doing part of your research individually. You have meetings, you have some little research groups and meetings with your group members, and you share what you're doing. So it's quite like a family environment where you connect with people, which was in my case good and bad, because my family members did not quite relate to what I was doing in the beginning. So that was a challenge. However, as as time went by and as I kept attending more and more of these research presentations, and I familiarized myself with the work that my lab mates were doing, I started learning more about their work. As you can see, it was always a lot of guys, like we usually criticize about any edtech or technology-related communities. So we were underrepresented for sure. And within this community, I learned a little more about their work, and that's what inspired me to add an aspect of XR to my research as well. before that, I hadn't really seen the value, or I didn't know about these technologies, and that's exactly where I thought, okay, so maybe there's a way you could apply immersive technologies to language learning as well. It's not just you make games, you make XR environments for entertainment, but there could be some educational value to all that experience. And therefore, it was in so luckily, in 2016, that's when, I joined JALT, exactly 10 years ago. And this is when the Kyoto chapter, together with the Kyoto University of Foreign Studies, organized an event on the use of AR, augmented reality, in informal learning contexts. So seeing the title of that event, it grabbed my attention, as you can imagine. The only place I was hearing these keywords and terminology was in my lab, and seeing that somebody or a group of people within JALT are also focused on this area of research was quite interesting and exciting to me. So I joined that event, and that's where I got to know about the work of Eric Hawkinson, our good friend and colleague. And I learned that he's using AR in informal learning contexts, so that was a very good, connection in my mind, thinking, okay, that all the terminology that I'm hearing at my lab, and there's finally somebody else in our field who is also talking about those, or a small group of people at least. And that's where I felt like my original epiphany was actually genuine. It wasn't just an idea, but it could be applied to language learning. Now, in my PhD years, I worked as, you can see here, on the design, development, and quality assurance of a blended course. So my PhD theme per se, the topic did not have to do much with immersive technologies, but seeing this connection and having, starting to build these little connections with people within JALT and the wider community, I was starting to think that, well, this needs to be part of my research as well. And that's where, with the help of a lab mate, we managed to add an AR component to the poster presentations of students who were in this course. So this was a blended course. This was before COVID, as you can see, 2017. And this course has always been blended. The students would meet 5 times during a semester, and that's when they would do some presentation or some project, depending on the instructor of the course. And in our case, we were interested in seeing how the students could do poster presentations, which is also a very good skill for students to develop. And to do those poster presentations, we got the students trained to use an AR app called Blipper back in the days. So this technology, I can see some people nodding. Yeah, I know we've all used those, and those were the days for these technologies. So we got the students to make their posters, the physical posters that we printed out, but then we also got them to connect some designated image or images on the poster to some digital content. Those could be a YouTube video related to the content of the poster, an extra image, or at other times those were 3D models. Depending on your purpose, you could connect another digital content to anything physical on the poster. Pretty much like, we all have experienced scanning QR codes when a URL pops up, but in this case, you're seeing some digital content like an image or a YouTube video. And so during the face-to-face lessons of that blended course, we set up the room like this, where a group of students were doing the poster presentations, and half of them, it was a large class by the way, were going around in a carousel trying to scan the images, also listen of course to the poster presenters there. And so with this setup, it worked out quite well, and we could see that the students were very much engaged. Their interviews and the surveys that we did later on showed that very well. And yeah, as you can see, we presented that at one of the Eurocall conferences back there. You can see Brent there in the members of the audience. Thank you for your support all over the years, really appreciate it. And yeah, so this was a great opportunity. The technology was quite new, to be honest. Sometimes it didn't work. We were using the free version, there's always some money and financial restrictions in any project that we are setting up, and this wasn't different. So there were times when the technology was not stable. All of these technologies are usually newer ones, with the same with AI, are most of the time developed by these startup companies, and they change things. You wake up one day and you see that the feature that you had planned your research on is gone, right? We've all been there. So it wasn't any different. So we did experience some glitches, some shortcomings, but overall we think that this brought the students into a more engaging environment, helped them to connect not just to the presenters and the physical posters, but also what they had to share beyond the physical elements there. Now, my very first experience, as I just explained to you about AR, was kind of what we did in the PhD project. But moving forward, I was also interested in virtual reality, and that's where I started working with the Google Tour Creator and Google Expeditions. If you remember these tools, they're discontinued at the moment, but they used to be a thing back in 2015-16 when they were first released. So that was my first engagement with virtual reality. I was using, as you can see in these images, very low-end VR headsets, the Google Cardboard, if anyone remembers, and then these kinds of glasses that the students could place on their phones in order to have a panoramic view of the content that was presented to them. So in this project, I was interested in using VR in my classroom, but this was right after graduation, and I was employed. I had a position at the University of Osaka, but it was a research-only kind of job. So I couldn't really have my own students and experiment with all of these technologies that I learned about. So that's where the collaboration again came in. So I worked with Eric and with his group of students. He was already teaching a course on new media, and so this was a great platform for us to test out expeditions. So his students built the virtual tours about their hometowns and introducing some local aspect of the culture. All of these were mostly Japanese students, but they each came from different parts of the country, so they did have something to share with one another that would be of interest, especially when they viewed it in VR in a virtual tour. So this project was quite successful. We evaluated the experience of the students and published a short book chapter on that, as you can see here. Now, I briefly touched on this, but as you can see, a lot of these AR and VR, apps were developed for the school context. Around the world, schools wanted the students to experience all of these, and therefore they had to be accessible to all the students. And sometimes the schools don't even have access to Wi-Fi, so things needed to work offline, and that's what Expeditions and the Tour Creator helped out very much with. But just like, they were okay at the time they were released, but back in 2020, as you can all remember, when we had to social distance, we couldn't be in the same room together, that's where technologies like this started becoming redundant. Because with the VR tours on Expeditions, you had to be on the same local network as the other participants. It didn't mean you had to have access to the internet. You could only have a modem, a router that would put you on the same network, but you still needed to be in the same physical room. And we know that in 2020 and a few years after that, this wasn't quite possible to guarantee in many schools and places around the world. And so that's when these technologies, unfortunately, started being discontinued. So in 2021, June of 2021, 5 years ago, Google officially discontinued Expeditions and the VR Tour Creator. They have some alternatives, some substitutes for that, but this kind of technology which we were working with was not there anymore. And so when one technology is gone, you have to think of an alternative and see how you can make up for all of that. We were having fun with the AR Expeditions, by the way, with my friends, as you can see here. This was quite powerful, but unfortunately, it couldn't work in the modern era, in the times when, those difficult times when we had to social distance. Now, we know that when COVID started and people were socially not engaging with each other in person. There was a need for so many of these environments that would create a sort of experience like people would have in real life. So we see a huge number of these environments that were developed during that time. Some of you may have had experience with a few of these, for example, Spatial, Engage, Mozilla Hubs, and All Space VR. I do remember that during one of the online years of JALTCALL, we used Gather Town, if you remember, for the poster presentations. I did use it to teach one class online at the University of Osaka during the COVID years myself, and that was a quite interesting experience in itself. So it was during this time that actually, well, I just finished the project on My Hometown project with Eric, and I knew a good friend and colleague, Neil Cowie, through JALTCALL and the wider JALT community for many years. That's when he invited me and Eric to give a talk at another group, another association that he's a member of, and that's the Escalite organization. It's quite a long name. Australasian Society, I'll do my best. Australasian Society for Computers in Learning in Tertiary Education. That's what it stands for. Thank you. So at the Escalite, just like JALT, just like Paul has got its SIGs, right? So the call is a SIG within JALT, and so for Escalite they had the mobile learning SIG. And Neil, for years, used to be one of the core members of the SIG. And so when he invited me and Eric to give a talk, we joined one of those webinars, and well, it was quite successful. It connected me to a group of people who are edtech specialists, but not necessarily language teachers. So that group was comprised of people from all over the different disciplines. So there were computer scientists, there were people, medical specialists, paramedics specialists, and so on. But all of them, what connected all of us was this interest in technology and edtech. And so, yeah, after the webinar, which was successful, I kept going back to their weekly meetings. They had meetings every Friday on Zoom, and I kept joining those. And this was a great turning point again for me to get familiar with people outside my field and see how they're using technology in their areas. And yeah, so this connection also helped us put together the little projects that we had done and present that at the 2021 Escalite conference. A year later, we put that into a paper that we published in AGED, the Australasian Journal of Educational Technology. And I finally, in 2024, 2 years ago, got to see the members in person for the first time in Melbourne. That was a great experience. So during the, I'll do a little flashback here. During the online years of COVID, I started, before all of this, in-person meetings happened and the publications happened. I was in touch with Neil after that webinar, and then I was interested in seeing how immersive technologies could be used in language learning and teaching, and that's where we started brainstorming. We thought that we could start with a small project. This was in 2021, right when nobody was on campus. And through a university grant, I was lucky to have acquired a few Quest 2 headsets, and I shipped them to Okayama. That's where Neil used to be. He's now in New Zealand at the University of Auckland, but back then he was a professor at Okayama University, and he had access to a small group of students, volunteers, who were willing to join this project. So I shipped those headsets to Okayama, and he and his students and me would remotely get into a VR environment to experiment that, but we went beyond that stage. So we asked the students in a self-directed learning environment to explore whatever tools that were out there. These were a group of Japanese and international students, by the way, a group of 5 students, a small group, but quite engaged. So they went into the wild and they looked for different tools and apps that were there, and every week or every 2 weeks, we would come together in Engage and try to share what we had found. So this gradually led us to using Mozilla Hubs, where the students showcased some aspect of their academic discipline. For example, this room was made to showcase the works of Kazuya Ishiguro, the Japanese-British author, because one student was interested in literature, some others did different rooms and different exhibitions, for example, about music or social media marketing and so on. And also, later on in the third stage of this project, apologies, we used 360-degree cameras, and the students managed to make tours of not just their campus, but one of them, when they went to South Africa on a study abroad program, took the camera there, took some photos, and then put that together. I don't have the shot here on my slides, but this was from a South African ranch that the student had made a tour of. I'm really sorry. Now, moving forward, we continued this stage of the research by connecting it to another upcoming research. So it was in 2022, after that initial experiment, that my first tuck-in grant luckily got accepted. It was funded, and so we wanted to build up on what we've done with that smaller group of people. For those who are not in Japan, this is a grants in aid for scientific research that the Japan Society for the Promotion of Science provides. It's a competitive fund, and I've been fortunate to have had that opportunity to use it in my area of interest. So we started looking at what has been done so far with VR and immersive technologies, and we put together a paper, a short conference paper, looking at what has been done so far. And we found out that even though there's been little studies done here and there, a lot of them tend to be short-term, one-off like studies and experiments. None of those have really looked at the impact of VR long-term, and that's what we felt was missing in the literature. Apart from that, one other thing that was missing was the fact that many of those studies, well, not many, some actually, had some methodological, shortcomings, should I say, because they were saying that the students improved their language skills in VR, whereas they were not really testing the students' language skills. They were just focusing on self-reports. Did you learn more? Yes, I did. Okay, I'll put it on the paper, kind of situation. So we were hoping to address these gaps, and therefore, when designing our own study, we tried to be a little more objective in our measurements. So, but at the same time, we also needed to make sure that the technology is accessible to everyone. For this project, we were not using an existing class of students. We were trying to recruit a group of volunteer students, and we saw the value in having students from different institutions within Japan. So most of them, by the way, because we both worked at the University of Osaka and Okayama University, would come from these two institutions. But then there were a couple of students from various places, mostly in the Kansai region, this area, who joined our study. We were interested in full immersion VR, but we knew that it would be very hard to ship, headsets to students, get them to set it up, troubleshoot. I'm sure that would be a huge logistical undertaking. So we needed to choose a platform that was accessible to everyone, one that they could easily set up, and if there was a problem, maybe refreshing the browser would solve that. So we went for a web VR platform which would run on everybody's device that had a browser. It was even accessible on phones, although the features on phones could sometimes be limited, or the interface was a little harder to work with occasionally. So we designed a mixed methods study in which we were interested in looking at the students' learning gains, as well as their engagement and the impact VR could have on their foreign language anxiety. Now, we spent 2 years collecting the data for this study. We were only 2 people, and running 2 experiments at the same time was not logistically, in terms of staffing and everything, was not possible. So we did the first half of the study in 1 year, and then took the time to do the second half in the following year. We started with Zoom. We were comparing Zoom with a VR platform called Frame, and as you can see here, Neil was doing the teaching. This was a course on small talk skills. By the way, he had made a great video series on small talk skills and how to bond with others, which was also on Udemy, but he had his videos on YouTube as well. So we followed a flipped classroom approach. The students watched the videos beforehand, They came to class over 8 weeks, and they would discuss some aspects of the course following the guidelines that we provided to them. And then at the end of the course, they would do 2 rounds of small talk practice. And all of those had to be recorded because we really wanted to objectively see what the students are doing and have a teacher assess those little pieces of performance by the students. And so we needed multiple devices. That's where my colleagues at the University of Osaka came to my rescue, and they gave me 10 of these PCs to be able to record not just the breakout rooms on Zoom, but also the so-called private voice zones on Frame VR at the same time. So that gave us a huge amount of data of the students' interactions. And we were using for the VR environment various sites. We had to, again, be very careful about how heavy those environments were and how easy it was for the students, sometimes with lower processing power computers, to run those on their devices. So all of these were, trade-offs and decisions that we had to make. Even though this environment looks more engaging, it's better, but it's too heavy. There are too many assets, so we can't simply use that. We have to make those decisions, of course, and test it all out. And then we found out that although many students were actually, we think that they are gamers, and they are actually, and they're used to using avatars and so on. When doing the VR study, we noticed that, not all the time the students it didn't all come to them naturally. So there were times when an avatar was here, another avatar was facing back and talking to that person. So just like in a classroom, we have to teach our students to give eye contact when giving presentations. It seemed like in the VR environment, even though we had provided some training, for some students this didn't come naturally. So we had to remind them that, just like you face somebody when you talk, your avatar needs to face the other avatar when you speak to them in the VR environment. So these were little things that were a bit unexpected, but we managed to train the students on the go. Now, as I mentioned briefly, the goal of this study was to compare the students' learning outcomes and then also to see how the impact of the environment would be, what the impact would be on their engagement as well as their foreign language classroom anxiety. We found that the students over time made progress actually in both groups. So both the Zoom group and the VR group over time, from the beginning, middle, to the end of the course, actually improved their small talk skills. And they were more or less equally engaged. In my understanding, this is partly because it was a comparative study and we needed to make sure that the 2 environments, the 2 conditions are comparable. So we couldn't really go wild with the VR and do things that would otherwise be impossible without the VR environment. And this could have affected our results. But nonetheless, when interviewing the students, we found that for some of them, this worked really like magic. They really liked the experience, and they said so many good things. On the other hand, there were some students whom we call the VR skeptics, by the way, as opposed to the VR enthusiasts, would find the environment a little, they were like, the technology is not there yet, so I don't want to go through the trouble of doing all of this just to be in a VR environment. So all of those were interesting insights. Because of lack of time, of course, I'm not going to go through all those details, but later on I have a slide where all the publications are shared there, and if you're interested, you can kindly go and have a look at them there. Now, moving forward, back in 3 years ago, I changed my institution. I used to work at a private university after the University of Osaka, but that's the year when I went to Otemon University. And at Otemon, I knew I'd worked with immersive technologies for quite a few years, and I was interested in applying that knowledge in this new context. In my past experience, I've seen that it always worked better in informal learning contexts. You don't want to take up a classroom, the class time to do things that take a lot of time to set up. So I talked to my good colleague and friend, Catherine Thornton, to see what possibilities are out there in order to implement some VR events at our Self-Access Learning Center. She's the director of that center, by the way. And we found out that some of our international students are already doing some events at the SALC using PowerPoint slides or poster presentations to introduce their countries. So why not add a VR aspect to that experience to make the students feel like they actually have traveled to that intercultural destination, to that foreign destination, and to give them a first-hand experience of that. So that's where our VR workshops came in. And we were still in the process of making that into a peer-reviewed publication, but we've done early publications on this in our university Keynote journal. And the students, I won't again play the video because of lack of time, but if you're interested, the link is there and you can kindly check that by yourself, which I will gladly share with you. We went beyond the on-campus events, and last year, luckily, good timing, there was the World Fair, the Expo in Osaka. And we managed to get some internal funding through the university, and we teamed up a group of 5 Japanese and 4 international students to do what they'd done already on campus at the Expo. So we took them to the Expo in Osaka, and that's where our international students, with the help of Japanese students, managed to use VR headsets to introduce an aspect of their culture to the wider community. We also did things, we have an affiliated junior high and high school, and so we took that experience to them. They actually came to our campus, to be more accurate. But yeah, it was quite, again, a new thing for so many of those students. And they found it very engaging. So yeah, as I said, we are still in the middle of making this into a full-scale paper, but we presented on the results and first findings at the PANSIC conference 2 weeks ago. Now, I think most of the projects that I have talked about, you can see there were aspects that prevailed and so much that failed. But in general, looking back, I think these are the 2 lessons that I have learned from my experience and engagement with EdTech. First, always collaborate. All of this wouldn't have been possible without having collaborators. Like even setting up a VR environment, making sure people are on there, making sure they are getting the learning experience that's required is impossible without having collaborators. So that's a lesson I learned early on back in my days in Iran, but then I've always look back on that in my career later. The second point is about sustainability. You know, many of us are excited about all of these technologies and research. AI is the new thing, of course, and we want to jump on any research activity and possibility out there. This is more of a note to self, by the way, because I'm like that. But we need to consider the sustainability aspect of things. So a lot of us who have done a PhD know that it's an intense period of a lot of research, but then you know that once after 4 or 5 years it's done and you're okay. But research in general, for many of us academics, is always in the background of our career. So we need to make sure it's sustainable, it doesn't lead to burnout, and that there's a storyline. I hope my story makes sense to you here today, but I feel like we need to connect things, put little pieces of jigsaw puzzle together and make sure that it's making sense first to us and then to the wider community. So I would like to end with a little note about my current research project. This is again another tuck-in study that I am getting help from Neil Cowie in New Zealand, and then hoping to connect our students at Otemon University with his students. He's teaching international students there, so Japanese students with international students in New Zealand who do virtual exchanges. So right this week, as I was also preparing for this conference, I was doing a lot of back and forth and emailing participants in that study. So it was a lot to set up, but hopefully it's going to be a worthwhile project. So we will be using ThingLink for virtual tours that the students would exchange. And then for the Japanese students, before they actually meet their partner online in the virtual exchange partner, we are hoping to use Gemini because our school provides for the free accounts for students. And so their data hopefully is not used to train the AI models. So we are hoping that the students could get some practice with their speaking skills using that, and then they would meet online using Zoom or Google Meet. So that's the project that hopefully we'll be able to share more on moving forward. For this project, I'm getting help from Nikon and Neil in New Zealand. So again, it's not possible to do things by yourself. Now, looking back, when I was preparing this talk in my head and also on slides, it felt more like I'd be talking about immersive technologies, which I did. But then a lot of it goes back to, I think, our communities, the people that we bring together through these technological innovations. And that's the aspect that remains with us, because technologies come, they disappear, tech companies close them down at a bad timing when we're hoping to be able to use them, but it's all about the people aspect of the research efforts that we put together, and that's what remains with us over the years. Now, a final note, I noticed that this is my 10th presentation at JALTCALL, and I have made a little album of the previous JALTCALL presentations. Some of you may have been at these conferences in the past, so 2016 in Tamagawa, 2017 in Matsuyama University. Moving forward, you know, I think Maki was at the conference yesterday. I'm not sure if she's here, but we did a talk together at Meiju University in Nagoya, and then Aoyama Gakuin University in 2019. 2020, I missed the JALTCALL conference, I think. We know why. 2021 was online and 2022 also online. So all I could find was these screenshots from the program. And moving forward, when I started the project with Neil, so obviously we did a lot of presentations together. The first one back was in Kumamoto, and then we went back to Nagoya again in 2024. And last year we were in Tokyo, the Tokyo University of Science with Michael and his team, and this is today. So thank you so much for engaging with me. Links to the images that I've used in the study, and then because a lot of these are photos, I'm not sure if the people in the photos would be happy for me to share them all with everyone, so I've just put the links there, the list of cited publications. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting. I would like to get some questions from the audience if you have them. Please raise your hand if you have any questions. Oh.
All right. Thank you very much. I've been following your work for the past 10 years here. It was such a wonderful talk. I'd like to ask you, right now we are living in the age of multi-agent.
Yes.
The first question is, how are you going to integrate the multi-agent to this VR work? And also the headset is too heavy.
Yeah.
Right now, I carried out sort of experiment without headset using 3D VR.
Yeah.
And then sort of, would it be possible to have a sort of like a smart glass VR and whatever? Just I want you to predict what's going to happen to the VR experiment.
Sure.
With the help of AI also. Thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you very much. Yeah, so when AI became a thing, Gen AI, we know that immediately, again, these tech companies who were developing VR stuff were thinking of how they could integrate AI into this. So even ThingLink, which is the platform I'm using at the moment, has a lot of AI integrated to it, not quite like the agents that you could interact with, not the NPC non-player characters, but there's lots of aspects of AI that's built into even a virtual platform for making tours. Yes, I do hope that the hardware would get more accessible, that it would get lighter and easier to use, but then luckily, these days, a lot of things are running on the web, so that's why I chose Frame, or I'm working with ThingLink, because these don't necessarily need VR headsets. You could experience and view the tours on a PC, just like, well, of course, the immersion level goes down, as you can imagine. It would be nicer to see an environment in VR if you had the possibility to, but then in the end, I think it's worth just trying it on a PC. If you can't set it up, if it's a large group of students, you can't provide headsets for, and that's what I did also in my later studies. Yeah, if it's a small group, it works. If it's an informal learning context, again, it could work. But with a large class set of size of students, then it would not be very easy, I should say. Thanks. Thank you very much, Cynthia.
Do you have any questions?
I'm loud, I don't need that. Thank you for your presentation. Out of all your projects, which was your favorite?
I would say the current project, which is a Beyond Borders thing, would be my favorite because that's where I always aim to go. Like, it's quite interesting to connect students on campus, like international and Japanese group of students, or students within Japan from different universities. But in the end, I think because not many of our students, as you know, for financial or time restrictions and other reasons, are not getting that study abroad or that intercultural exchange experience. I see value in projects that would give them sort of that experience. So my latest project, I would say I'm the most excited about. Yeah, we'll have to see how that unfolds, but at the moment, yes, that's the one. Thank you.
Mehrasa, thank you. I have been watching your presentations for a decade now, and I remember when you first showed us the cardboard things, and you called them empathy machines.
Right,
Could you expand a little bit on what you mean, how this is an empathy machine?
Yeah,
which was a great term, and I still remember that 10 years on.
Yeah, thank you very much for all your support over the years. Really appreciate it. So yes, I mean, it could easily, the cardboard was less than 1,000 yen, and it would work with everybody's smartphones, which would, I mean, ownership in Japan is pretty high, almost 100%, so that is something you could bring to everyone very easily without a complicated setup. And the reason why we called it the empathy machine was that, back in the days, there were some apps, you could also develop some of those tours that would take people to areas, to zones that they would otherwise not be able to access. Let's say a war zone, for example, or a disaster area, like the Fukushima disaster when it happened in Japan. It wasn't easy for everybody to go there and see it with their own eyes, but this empathy machine was bringing the experience to people back then. Same with, other conflict zones. So in that sense, yeah, we thought that it was and it wasn't our terminology, to be honest. We were borrowing from people who had used this term before us, but yeah, it is an empathy machine, depending on how you use it, but in many ways it is. And even now, using it for intercultural experiences, I think it puts the students in the shoes of those, let's say, international students or international partners that they're doing the exchange with. So they can see their student life from each other's students' life, and also learn about aspects of each other's culture in a way that feels more like you've actually been there and you've traveled to those locations. So yeah, we do see value in that. Thank you.